Welcome. Let's get started. Thanks for coming to this customer panel discussion. My name is Dave Randall, and I'm a program manager in the configuration manager and Windows Intune teams at Microsoft. This particular panel is a little bit different than most of the breakout sessions that you've been attending. I know that as you come down to MMS, you're here to get a lot of product knowledge, a lot of learnings. You may be attending breakout sessions and learning details about how all of the different features work. Maybe you're attending instructor-led labs and learning firsthand how all of those different components that you need to use while you're back home are working. Or maybe you're having conversations with partners, learning about their particular solutions, attending their sessions, or talking with them in the Partner Expo about how their particular solution fills some gaps in the product that you might need. And all of those are great ways of understanding feature functionality and knowing exactly the things that you can do with the product so that when you get back, you can exercise those. There are a couple of notes from the field type of sessions that are here where maybe you're getting some best practice information, but really there are no customer interactive type of presentations that are here at MMS. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to invite 4 different organizations that have been using Configuration Manager and Windows Intune to talk specifically to you about their particular environments. Because I think when you're here and you're having conversations with the different product group or with the different partners, you're getting a lot of that, really how do I use this particular product? But there's a lot of different other elements to your day-to-day job that we don't necessarily cover. You've got a variety of different challenges. Some of those challenges may be political challenges. Some of them may be technical challenges. I know that I've talked with a lot of customers who are still on Configuration Manager 2007, and even though most of our presentations are focused on 2012 SP1, you're still using existing product, and you have challenges with those as you're looking towards migrating up to the latest version. So this particular customer panel session is really designed to cover a couple of different things. I've invited these 4 folks here, and they'll go through, we'll spend about 5 to 10 minutes for each of the different customer panel members, and we'll kind of go in this particular format. First, I'll ask them to talk about who they are and what their role is in each of their different organizations, so you can kind of get an idea that, in fact, they're really one of you. These aren't people who are members of the product group, or I know that some of them have presented here, but they're really representing themselves as IT professionals who are using the console, working with things on a day-to-day basis, just like all of you are. Once they talk a little bit about their role, they'll talk about their environment. Each of them come from differing environments, and they've got unique aspects to those environments which represent different challenges. So they'll talk about their environment and some of the uniqueness that they have in dealing with Configuration Manager or Windows Intune on a daily basis. The next area that I'll have them talk about is some challenges. You know that typically from the product group perspective, or as you're listening to these, a variety of different challenges are talked about, and usually there's a technical way of solving that particular problem. But as I've talked with a lot of customers here, there are political challenges. Sometimes the desktop guys don't want the server guys monkeying in their system, and the server guys don't want the desktop guys monkeying in their system. And in some cases, it's actually a good technical reason. Maybe the product doesn't support that particular scenario very well. But I've also found that a lot of times, maybe there's some little political fiefdoms that exist out in the environment, and you need to figure out how to navigate those waters as well. Sometimes the technology can help you navigate those by giving a solution that works to break down some of those barriers. So I've asked them to talk about 3 different challenges in their environment and how they've overcome them. Because I think that last bit, how they've overcome those particular challenges, is a really valuable piece of information that you can take back with you and leverage that in your own environments. The last area that I'd like them to cover is the one favorite thing that they love about Configuration Manager or Windows Intune. And although it could be a checkbox, maybe it could be something like endpoint protection that brings a lot of value to an environment, or it could be something like bandwidth control that really saves money across all the way from the server down to the desktop. It really doesn't matter specifically what those particular favorite things are, but the real value in having them talk about the favorite thing is that you've got an opportunity to say, wait a minute, if these guys absolutely love and can't live without this particular feature, maybe there's something missing that I wasn't aware of. And so as they're talking about those particular favorite items, think about whether or not there's a new opportunity there that you hadn't thought of before. So once we go through and each of them have the opportunity to cover their environment, their challenges, and their favorite items, we'll open it up for Q&A. And this particular session, as I said, will be a little bit different than most of the breakouts that you have. We'll spend about the first half of this going through each of their different stories, and then we'll open it up the second half for Q&A. So this is really meant to be an interactive discussion between you and the panel members. I think that particular customer, as an IT professional, bit of perspective is the word I'm looking for. That perspective that they bring is really something unique and different that you won't always get from the rest of the breakout sessions and labs and so forth here. So to start off our introductions, we'll first have Brian Allen talk. Brian Allen works at Microsoft. He's involved in managing one of the largest configuration manager deployments. And I'll let Brian go ahead and kick it off. Brian?
Folks, my name is Brian Allen, as Dave already mentioned. I'm a lead program manager at Microsoft, and as Dave mentioned again, we manage one of the larger config manager infrastructures out there. We are one central administration site. Give you a little bit of background on our infrastructure. We're one central administration site, 6 primary sites. We have 12 secondary sites and 255 plus DPs. That's geo-distributed around the world. We have around 300,000 clients reporting across these sites. We have fairly high-speed networks in all offices, and we leverage direct access for machines that are remotely connected. Our lab environment, I'm trying to remember the format in my head. Our lab environment mimics our production environment, and so, but we also have a pre-production environment as well. What was the latter part?
Challenges.
Challenges.
Some of the areas that have been challenges for you and how you overcome them.
So for us, one of the main challenges for us is the ability to maintain a production quality service while also dog fooding the latest and greatest products. That's always a challenge. Again, 300,000 clients, which is about 182,000 users. They expect the services to be production quality, but we have to balance that with the ability to bring in dog fooding early releases of the product because, of course, we are Microsoft, and we want to make sure that we are validating, testing, rolling this out at Microsoft to ensure that we're driving bugs, DCRs back to the product group to ensure that we release a quality product to the enterprise. And so that's one of the bigger challenges. Another challenge that we've seen with the introduction of unified device management is going to the more end-user centric model, right? Config Manager SP1 is in the face of the users now. You have the software center, you have the application catalog, and now with unified device management, you have the company portals. And so now these user-facing services are, long gone are the days of config manager admins operating in the background. You're now user-facing, and users expect these services to be online all the time. So another challenge. The way we solve those challenges is user education. We have to make sure the help desk, our support teams are updated, enrollment guides, work smart guides being produced and handed out to our users to ensure that they are aware of how to use these services and ensure that our support teams are able to support the services, because as config manager admins, we're not staffed appropriately to support 182,000 users for some of these end user facing services. And the one thing that I would say we could not live without, well, it's 2 things I would say. CCM eval, our client health numbers have gone way up with the introduction of CCM eval, which makes sure the clients are remaining healthy. So that's been a huge win for us. And then also the company portals. I mentioned it's a challenge, but it's also one of the things that we can't live without, because now it allows users to be productive, truly productive, anytime, anywhere, and access their apps at any time. And so that's one of the cool things and key things that we leverage here at Microsoft.
Excellent. One of the areas, I don't know if I'll just interject here. I've talked with a lot of customers who have very locked down environments, and they've got a standardized desktop. Users are typically not administrators on their desk. But I know at Microsoft, I've always been an administrator on my machine. I get to build my own machine, make it the way I want. Have there been any particular challenges around we all own our machines and we don't think IT should go mucking with our computers in terms of being able to manage at Microsoft?
No, not really, right? It's more about those end user facing services. Folks are admins of their machines. And we often rebuild our machines at Microsoft, often dog fooding, and so in rebuilding machines. And now that you have these user facing services, that folks expect these things to come right away as soon as the machine is built. But you know how policies have to come down and things of that nature. So we get a lot of escalation saying, hey, I just rebuilt my machine, but I don't have access to the application catalog. I don't see the company, on the device. It doesn't matter. But for the machine, I don't have the application catalog. I cannot get apps. And it's the constant, give it a minute, policies will come down, you'll be able to access it. And that's a FAQ that we have to push to the help desk, but that's a constant escalation we get when folks are rebuilding machines.
All right, excellent. So next on the panel we have Greg Ramsey. Greg Ramsey works at Dell, and many of you probably recognize Greg maybe by face and by name. He's an amazing community contributor in a variety of different areas related to Configuration Manager. He's also been MVP, so you may see him oftentimes on the forums answering a lot of questions. But today he's here as an IT pro, just like the rest of you. So Greg, go ahead and give us an introduction and
Thanks,
continue
Dave.
on.
Morning, my name is Greg Ramsey. As he said, I work for Dell. I'm one of the guys that manages the Configuration Manager infrastructure for Dell. I'm also on a team that we manage for a few other companies as well, where we provide Configuration Manager as a service. So get a little bit of experience with some different sizes of companies as well. In our Dell environment, we've got about 140,000 systems globally. We do have a CAS, and we have 3 primary sites. When we moved to Configuration Manager 2012, we took advantage of some third-party integration and removed basically almost all of our servers from anywhere except for our 3 regional data centers. So we significantly reduced our server count from, I think we had 120 servers in 2007. We've got about 30 now in 2012, just to try to really consolidate and just reduce that infrastructure that we have. We were part of the early adopter program, so we got to run pretty bleeding edge, just as you guys did for quite a while. You know, there's always some fun times when you're working through those times as well. Let's see. Some of our challenge has been getting the server team on board to get them migrated. Their current experience, they're not actually all migrated yet to 2012. We're still in that process with them, just because of how bleeding edge we stay with Microsoft, with early adopters. We normally don't migrate the server space until we get to release code. They've had some fears and concerns about the .NET requirement, and you guys have done some things to alleviate some of those issues and things we have to deal with there. Trying to think of other big challenges for us. We're very user-driven, so even in Configuration Manager 2007, all of our users are very familiar with run advertised programs. They call it RAP. Very, very heavy users. If you need project to do your job, you go to run advertised programs to install project. When we went, obviously, to 2012, run advertised program kind of translates into Software Center or the application catalog. We've had a little bit of challenge with the user experience and making sure that users know where to go to get their software. And we're still working through some of those now. With the number of applications that we deploy, we do have some performance issues that we work through just for the number of applications that have to appear in Software Center. So we are going to move to more of a user targeting environment moving forward. I think for me, one of the biggest pieces, and it's kind of hard, we've been working with 2012 for so long, as of late, the biggest thing that I see that helps me in my everyday job is the PowerShell integration that you guys did with SP1. That's huge for me because we've got a global team. There's a lot of things we do. We've got to have some repeatable processes. We've got to do everything we can to remove any chances of human error, and obviously we do a lot of that with roles-based administration, things like that, but there are still certain things that we want to make sure that we can manage and make sure that objects people are creating fit certain standards, things like that. Using status filtering rules and PowerShell, we can easily monitor a lot of those things and make changes as we need to, or notify people. So that's been a very big thing for us. Let's see, what else were we going to talk about?
Well, if that was your favorite feature, I'm not surprised.
Yes, I've been pushing for that for a while.
Yeah.
So, the user experience is a significant improvement over 2007. It's really, for us, it's huge. And like you said, when systems first get built, I think that's probably our biggest challenge. We're trying to reduce the number of collections that we use, because a lot of our first level support guys, and this is the same problem as in 2007, right? There was one thing missing from Run Advertised programs or from Software Center, and all of a sudden they start repairing clients, beating up clients, and it's not a client issue at that point. It's, there's 6 other things. So we're definitely working through those things, and by moving to the user targeting application catalog, there's a lot of those evaluations that we don't have to wait on, and polling intervals and things like that. So I think that's where we need to go. That's where we're headed on that.
All right, thanks, Greg. So next on the customer panel, we have Robbie Townsend. Robbie Townsend is here from the Medical University of South Carolina. And interestingly enough, I've been quite surprised at the number of medical centers that are attached to universities that are represented here at MMS. Although I invited Robbie to the panel for his long-time involvement in the technology of adoption preview and the opportunity to provide feedback directly to the product group, I think he also represents a great customer segment that has been showing up here in the university side, as well as other departments that are attached to universities. So, Robbie, I'll let you go ahead with your introduction.
As I said, my name is Robbie Townsend. I'm a senior systems engineer and team lead at the Medical University of South Carolina. I'm primarily responsible for all things related to Configuration Manager, SCEP, AppV, and FIM. I guess our lab environment, they asked to describe our lab environment, which my answer was our lab is production. As he mentioned, we've been active in the TAP, both with 2012 RTM and then again with SP1. And we have a lab that we basically verify that we can install and it doesn't just blow up, but because we have full support. When we went to, for instance, the first beta of SP1, we had 4 engineers from Redmond on site. So we kind of live on the edge there, which makes it fun, but a little scary at times. Big thing, features, especially with SP1, or I guess in general, the integration of SCEP is huge. We've been on using Forefront when it was actually called just, I think it was Forefront Client Systems or something like that, from a long time ago. And then and that was a separate console. So I'm sure you've heard the whole theme of a single pane of glass, and that's all part of it. Management of Macs, like a lot of places, especially, we're a medical center, but we're also a university, and then we have another group of, another company of physicians. So we have 3 HR departments, so policies and stuff kind of get blurred. But like a lot of places, Macs are just in the enterprise are growing tremendously, and they've typically always been a consumer device, so there's not a lot of those enterprise management products. So with SP1, we had several departments that were about to go spend a lot of money on to manage their Macs, whether it be hardware, software inventory, patch management, job updates, that sort of thing. We caught them in time and just said, just try it. We'll put the client on there and see if it gives you what you need with reporting and stuff, and all of them stuck with it. So that's worked out great, saved a lot of money, obviously, and also kept other people that really shouldn't be managing servers or applications out of that realm. The one challenge with the Macs is the installation of the client. It is, right now at least, I know they're working on a wizard-based installation for a future release, which will be huge, is that it's kind of a cumbersome process. The end user, or most end users, can't do it. We have an IT resource do it for them. I mean, 15 or 20 minutes to get it. It's just a bunch of steps. It's gotten better than from beta 1 of SP1, where it was like, I think 30 steps and lots of certificates and stuff. But once they're on there, it just works, which has been great. A couple of things with SCEP. With SP1, we got the dial tone connectivity. If you don't know what that is, it's It's where before, when a machine got infected, it could take up to an hour, depending on your policy eval, to see that in the console, that a machine either got infected and couldn't be cleaned, needs a reboot. It's usually within 10 minutes, almost instantly. Also, if we need to kick off a scan or update the definitions, you just right-click and it's instant, because it's a constant connectivity, and that was a big thing as far as our day-to-day operations of our endpoint protection. Let's see, challenges. Other than that, I think that's about anything.
Or favorite feature?
Favorite feature? Well, I guess going back to it's the Mac management, just because it's made us truly. We actually do have a few Linux admins we convinced, which was not an easy sell. To go to a Linux admin and say, hey, put a Microsoft product on your server. But a few of them did it, and it's obviously basic and stuff. But I think it's going to catch on to have, again, that single pane of glass for multiple people, and then using RBAC, because we now have people who traditionally would not have needed access to the console. We can keep them locked down to just what they need to see, which has been great.
All right, great. Thanks, Robbie. So the fourth person we have on our panel is Brian Grubb. Brian's from AstraZeneca. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of you that are still using Configuration Manager 2007. Many of you are completing your migrations to 2012, or you may be in the process and developing your plans for it. And Brian brings a variety of perspectives on that migration process. They're working through their 2012 deployment, and so I asked Brian to come talk on behalf of AstraZeneca about their experiences. Brian?
Morning, everyone. As Dave said, I'm Brian Grubb. I'm the lead for end-user computing at AstraZeneca. We are a global pharmaceutical company based out of the UK. I work out of our Wilmington, Delaware headquarters. I wish we were on 2007. We're actually still on SMS 2003, and we're right now, not only that, we're on Vista as well. So we've got quite a bit of a challenge in terms of transforming our desktop environment. So what we've been doing over the past couple of months is working with Microsoft and the professional services group to put our design together. And what we've been able to do is introduce a significant reduction, similar to the Dell example. We're taking our SMS infrastructure and roughly cutting it by 2/3. We're going to use some third-party integration products as well, because we have a very globally distributed user base. So we're in about 65 countries, about 65,000 users using anywhere between 60 and 70,000 devices. So we've got a lot of distributed users that we need to manage, and we don't want to put infrastructure all over the world because it's just too costly. It's too time consuming to get done. Certainly when you're having to rely on third-party integrators in South Korea to do the work and keep your program on track. So we've been able to take advantage of some of the branch caching capabilities that are coming out. So we've been going through the planning process, and we're now at a point where we've got our test environment up and running, and we're using the test environment to validate the work, validate the design, and get us into a position where we can actually go into deployment. In terms of our test environment, we've got pretty much a mirror image of our production environment within a lab environment. So we've got our AD in there, we've got our Exchange in there, we've got all our SMS boxes in there. We do all of our testing and validation in that environment before we promote to production, because we are a validated organization. We have to have a lot of controls in place because of FDA regulation, because of HIPAA, because of EU regulations for patient information, and as well as the the drug development process. So we have to do all of our testing in that environment before we promote it to production. And that's basically where we're at today. We are due to start our production deployment in the July timeframe. Our plan is to push SCCM out to all of our Vista clients using SMS, of course. That's going to be an interesting one. So push SCCM out to all of our Vista clients, and then use SCCM and some other third-party products to do a self-service update to Windows 7, and that will get us off of the Vista platform, get us to SCCM. We also have, in sort of the future roadmap component, and this is where things like Intune come into play, we do have about 27,000 to 30,000 iPad users in the organization. Our sales force has taken a decision to leverage the content capabilities of the iPad. You know, it's a shiny, nice device. When you walk into a doctor's office, it, you know, tends to get a little bit of a wow factor. I'm not sure how long that's going to last, but ultimately we have a long-term vision of taking the MDM solution that's been put into place to support that, because this started about a year and a half ago or so. So, you know, the Intune product is starting to catch up, is ultimately to switch all of those things over and as we said earlier, use a single pane of glass to manage all of our devices, similar to probably everybody else in the room here. We're starting to see a significant growth in the Mac environment. So we are looking at, again, using the single pane of glass to manage a Mac estate. So we're working through that as well. So really what we're looking at to do, and the thing that I'm most excited about when I think about the product set is that convergence and getting to a single product that allows us to manage all of our devices. And, you know, coming off of SMS, just being able to take advantage of some of the new features and functions that are much more user-friendly. Scheduling, for example, that's huge for us. What we don't want to do is have you know, patching sessions kick off in the middle of presentations, which, you know, you really can't control that in an SMS environment. So really being able to take advantage of some of that new features and functions. So that's AstraZeneca.
All right, excellent. So now we'll kind of flip over to the second half of this particular session and really put you guys in control of where we go. So here's how I'd like the Q&A to go. Certainly please step up and use the microphone. And as you're thinking about all of those different elements that the panel members have that are well aligned with your environment, maybe represent some of the same challenges and you want to drill into that, also consider that even though they may not have explained some of those same things, each of the different panel members may also have a perspective on your particular question. So go ahead and direct to someone who you think may first answer your question, but we'll also have an opportunity for the other panel members to answer that question from their perspective as well. So the hardest thing is always to get the first person to step up to the microphone. So who's willing to be the first one to come on up and open up the Q&A? Awesome.
I usually write the question down before I ask it so that I don't stumble through, so you're going to have to bear with me. But with the title of this being Unified Device Management and really Intune's vision, we heard at the keynote, it'd be really interesting from a practical example. I'm going to lay out something that I see happening. We have users that want more choice, and they are going choices. You talked about sales, choosing the iPad because it maybe has a tactile feel with the customer, and they can flip through their sell sheets. Those sell sheets should be governed by, and they are governed by, data policy that is not, in my understanding, in the services that Unified Device Management give for, let's say, Intune or even some of the 2012 SP1 packages. So when it comes to device management, are we really sort of missing an issue that says, yeah, we want to enable that device, but, you know, how do you convince the business side to say we can't provide the same level of service on those devices unless you accept that it's over technology like VDI or something. So I'd like to hear from you on sort of this other challenge device-wise. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Okay.
So when we think about a sales rep standing in front of a physician or somebody else in the healthcare environment, certainly in well, everywhere, all of the content needs to be, it's all validated, and it all needs to be signed off by what we would call actually, I'm not even sure what the department name is called anymore, but there's a function within our organization and within any pharma company that will review all of the product information, make sure that it is on target in terms of what's been approved by the regulatory bodies. So even all of the images and all of anything that's going to be presented all has to be validated, all has to be on target. So, and any deviation from that lands you in hot water with whether it be the FDA or the EU. So to be able to do that on a desktop, so what we have in the field right now are, we do have Lenovo tablets running around out in the field. People are using those. They're using a Siebel-based selling system right now. There's going to be a transition to a Salesforce.com, I believe, is the product that's been selected and the Salesforce automation tool actually manages that interaction. So all of the content is locked down within the Salesforce automation tool, and all we're doing what we would be doing at the base level with the device is just ensuring that it meets a couple of basic security requirements to be on the network. So we're really not managing the device per se. We're just saying, do you meet the minimum requirements for you to be able to connect to the corporate network?
We're in the process of moving to Intune, but we recently had, or I guess it's been about 6 months ago, purchased a third-party MDM solution. And one of the things we're finding is because of restrictions Apple puts in place, or in the case of Android, because there's 8,000 different flavors of it that the manufacturers change, that whether it's Intune or whether it's other parties or other third parties, there's only so many things you could do, like blacklisting. It's not truly a blacklist that it prevents the user from going to the App Store and installing it. Blacklist just means we can get alerted in our console that someone installed it, and then we can really actions are contacting them or cutting them off from the network or from their email and that sort of thing. But a lot of the products aren't there yet from a complete lockdown standpoint, fully automated at least, and obviously especially not role-based where you can say this is a salesman, give them this profile. I mean, it's getting there. It's getting better all the time. But again, you're always locked into what Apple and the various flavors of Android. Windows Phone 8 is a little more easier a lot more flexibility. But so I think you'll see that improve over the coming months and year.
And you spoke about, your question was, you mentioned governance versus management. And for us, we've seen from a management perspective and a governance perspective, it is a shift. It's a paradigm shift, right? And so in order to get folks, it's an opt-in service with device management. Folks are bringing their own devices, their personal devices, into the enterprise. And they expect these devices to work, and they expect to be productive on these devices. So it's an opt-in model. And in order for folks to opt in, you have to produce apps. It's going to be about the apps. It's going to be about the company portal and the apps that you're offering to entice folks to opt into the service. And when they're opting into the service, they're agreeing to be governed, not managed, but governed. They're going to accept a set of policies that's going to allow them to get the apps that's going to allow them to be productive. And that's enticing to users, right? And they're willing to accept these policies, and we've seen that at Microsoft.
Just to add on to that, so we've got a huge demand for BYO. A lot of our scientists in the R&D community are, they're tinkerers. We were joking earlier before the session that I think you said you've got a couple of hundred CTOs and CIOs. I've got a couple thousand CTOs and CIOs all saying this is the best thing to do. But we say, okay, well, you can certainly do that, and we're absolutely willing to work with you to bring the device that you want to use, but that the flexibility comes with a cost. And what we're having trouble articulating to folks is what is that cost and why is it important for us as an organization to be able to provide a base level of consistency and management to secure the rest of the corporate network. So.
All right, I did grab a microphone, so rather than having folks come up, we can pass this around. I think you had a question.
Okay. And I think my question is kind of directed towards you a little bit. I work at a hospital. We have several off-site clinics and a remote hospital, and a lot of them are in rural areas. You can't have both those on. More bandwidth. We're working with T1s a lot of times, and trying to get the data to those sites is something that we need to kind of reevaluate. Right now we're on 2007 and Config Manager 2007, and we're using branch distribution points. Should we move to a branch cache environment, or should we keep the distribution point at these offsite clinics? Or what's the best way to manage these clinics?
That's a good question. It really depends on your environment, right? I mean, branch cache is an option, but yeah, I really couldn't give you the. We've been on 2012 so long. It's tough for me to even speak on the 2007 perspective. So.
Well, we're actually migrating to 2012 right now, so.
So first thing I always ask when someone asks about branch cache is, do you use OS deployment with Configuration Manager? If it's yes, then that's a red flag, because currently branch cache is not supported in a WinPE environment. So you can't leverage that ability at that point. So there are third-party options, or like you said, you can use the distribution points remote. You also have the pool DP functionality with SP1. That's pretty significant. If you're not using OS deployment, then definitely branch cache is something you can consider, and I think you might have a little more information about that.
Well, I was just going to mention the subnet-based sharing. You deploy it to a machine that's on, and then when other machines on that subnet need to go get the data, they can get it from that machine's CCM cache instead of going all the way back. But yeah, if there's OSD, I'd say a distribution point if it's possible. I mean, we've had one site where we just sort of took a low-used PC and let that be a distribution point, and the user didn't even know it because it wasn't too many people trying to image at the same time, but we just kind of see how far along we could get away with it before they started complaining, and they never did. So.
And again, right, to their point, are you using OSD? It depends on what your environment is. And after the session, I have my lead engineer here. We can give you more pointers, but we dig into, ask a couple more questions about your environment, then we can provide better guidance.
All right, thanks. Who else has questions?
I would like to know if you have plans to incorporate production machines, maybe the laboratory equipment, attack scanner that is connected to the red and has Windows, to the network and has Windows. Do you have plans to manage that with operating system, system manager, system center?
So I think I catch the question. So do we have what I'll call specialty equipment, for example?
Yes.
Or
a peel packer, some cutter machine, a medical device that is connected to the network.
So I can certainly answer for how we tend to manage those types of environments. So we have we have one of the largest manufacturing facilities in the world, yes, outside of Stockholm, Sweden. The place is huge. It's really cool. I've been there for a couple of tours, and every time I go in, it's just unbelievable. But in those environments, what we have are multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment for packaging, for manufacturing product, etc. And those products tend to be bound to a certain type of system. So we've still got NT4 in some of those environments, because you're not going to replace a $1,000 laptop and put a $10 million piece of equipment at risk. So what we tend to do in that environment is we actually subnet it all off. It's all its own environment. We have we have SMS on those devices right now, and we have a team that just focuses specifically on that environment. It's completely isolated from the rest of the production network, but we are taking advantage of some of the automation opportunities, and we will be looking at using SCCM to also manage those. But again, on a subnet, having a specialty team, we delegate the access for those folks to do what they need to do, and we manage them completely separate, different type of scheduling, different type of job, different type of testing that needs to go in, because we can't risk taking out a multi-million-dollar piece of equipment, because if we go down for one day, I think it's like, I don't know, $15 million in lost sales or something. I mean, it's a significant number, so we have to be very careful in that environment.
We're similar in that we have lots of medical devices, and basically if it runs Windows, then SCCM and SCEP go on it with appropriate exclusions for scanning and stuff. We try to make sure we don't sign contracts with vendors, because lots of vendors like to say no AV or no patching. If there's no other option, or if it's non-Windows, then it goes on a lockdown. We call it a medical device subnet that keeps it isolated from, typically from the internet and then from other devices, because it's not only needs to not from a security as in access security, but also because if it's Windows and it absolutely can't have config man on it, then we don't want it to have any access to anything else, just to be absolutely sure, because it's usually hooked up to a patient.
All right. Who's next?
I'm just curious about Intune and on-premise MDM solutions, because there's a lot of those out there right now. So we actually are using a third-party tool, and we'd evaluated those. And our security team has some concerns about cloud management of those devices. So I'm just curious, would Intune ever be something that would be provided on-premise, or will that only ever be a cloud-based solution? Or how can it compete with all of the providers that do on-site MDM?
I can tell you that that's the same direction we got from, I mean, I'm part of the security team, and when we got asked to be in the MDM beta, we actually turned it down initially, because the first thing was you have to synchronize AD up to the cloud.
Well, yep, and that's exactly
right.
what we're
When you
seeing.
say that to someone, especially in security, they don't even ask questions, they just say no.
You're doing well.
But we actually went back and said, actually, we would like to try this, because as I mentioned earlier, we just had recently bought for a one-year subscription to a third-party MDM. But yeah, the whole thing with Intune is obviously a little different than what you're dealing with the third parties. But you know, I think they're trying to do a lot of the heavy lifting too. You don't have to stand up a server and put it in the DMZ and deal with the firewall exceptions. You just let Intune handle it all. And you know, I couldn't see us ever doing something like putting Exchange in the cloud. But you know, AD, it's not like it's passwords necessarily. It's mainly just the object. So I think we're going that direction. Will there be an on-prem version? I mean, I've heard things, but I don't know for sure. But it would be nice if there was that option, sure.
Thank you.
All right. Who else? It's still early in the morning. You guys can't be that far asleep yet.
I'm curious for the people who have a lot of Macs, if you could tell us a little bit more about your environment. Are you AD joined on your Macs? Do you use like Apple Remote Desktop or anything? Any third-party AD stuff?
We'll imagine about 800 Macs out of about 17,000 total endpoints. They're not, I think maybe one or two are AD joined. I mean, it's not something we've ever required. It's, you know, a lot of people, the way I look at it is, hey, now you can log in with the same username and password. But typically the Mac user is that independent. You know, they don't want the whole idea of us pushing stuff to them. I mean, each department's IT admins have made the decision of whether they want config man on them. But it's still kind of just those basics like inventory. And you know, an example of when there's a critical Java patch before they'd have to run and find every machine and sit there and do it. And the first time we showed them that, look, here's how you package it and deploy it, and you don't even leave your desk. And that sold them on that. But they still don't want the end users to really see that they're being managed, because I mean, that just seems to be the culture of the Mac users, at least today.
All right. More questions?
Yeah, I'm just curious for actually the whole group here. You know, what's your real-world experience been with distribution point maintenance? You know, what's the real requirement that you've seen? Do you have somebody doing it day to day? And do you expect that to change as you move to Windows Intune, if you are, and putting distribution points up on Azure?
Yeah, we haven't done the cloud-based distribution point, but really we don't have any day-to-day maintenance. You know, occasionally we'll see a package fail on the content verification, and we'll just refresh it. But usually the way we find out about it is when somebody calls and they can't get Adobe updates to push down or something, and that's what it is. But I mean, we're not gigantic like some of these guys. We only have 3 distribution points, so In those cases, it's not a very big maintenance deal.
We've had a little bit of work we've had to do on DPs. Some is just learning and understanding how things are working a little differently. We had a little bit of challenge with pool DPs at first. Validate content is priceless. The one feature that I wish was there was automatically redistribute if it fails on something, but I'm pretty confident if I have a little bit of time on my hands, I can link that PowerShell together to make that work. So that's where I'm headed with that. But for the most part, I mean, single instance store is great. I highly recommend do everything you can to keep everything in there. We've had a couple issues where we've found when we moved to 2012 that in some of our locations there were some ACLs on some routers preventing a file named install.exe, for example, to be downloaded over IIS. And there's been certain occasions where we haven't been able to get that changed, and we've actually had to put packages on DP shares again to use a different method to transfer that. That's painful, something that we can get around, but at least we have a workaround to get those shares. But get rid of the shares as much as possible, in my opinion.
If I can ask just a quick follow-up, are any of you using accelerators?
No.
All right, in the back.
So more and more each day, users in our company bring more their device, bring your own device kind of management. We're looking into maybe a Citrix receiver to help them resolve some of their requests, but we start to see more people bringing their iPad or some of their tablet to connect to our environment, and we have no solutions to provide any security or application management or nothing yet in terms of in the near future. So do you guys have any, how do you guys manage those in your environment today?
So we've got a, so we do have a Citrix instance that we run, and we do allow folks to leverage the receiver capability. The challenge that we've seen with that and the pushback that we've seen, it's not native functionality. At the end of the day, people want to use the device in its native format. So when we can, we try to allow people to use it natively. So we're working through a part of a project right now to the Mac question earlier, on fully integrate the Mac and have it be AD joined, have it be able to synchronize with our Exchange environments, etc. But for those applications that just aren't going to work, whether it be on Android, whether it be on iOS or Mac OS X, we're going to mount it in Citrix and make it available that way.
Yeah, we're in the same boat. We've had Citrix for remote access to applications for years. I mean, because the BYOD thing, it seems like people have always been bringing their own devices. It's just that now, just with the last 3 years, people who would never have had any type of smartphone have one. That's the big change. They were bringing laptops, now they're bringing iPads. And they've always used Citrix, and I definitely agree with what he's saying is people, that receiver's the only way, and they don't like it, but they don't have another choice. And one of the reasons we're doing MDM is to enforce that passcode lock, because that's the other problem is, it times out and that sort of thing, but people don't like to have a password or an auto lock. And so our MDM implementation is primarily just to enforce that, to say if you're going to connect our resources, which includes the Citrix receiver, you're going to have to set a passcode and an auto lock due to inactivity. And you can tell people that all day long, but until you actually do something to force them, especially because we've got over 8,000 mobile devices out there, and having medical information. We know physicians have PHI in their email. When they get a voicemail, it turns into an email, so now it's on that device. But people aren't thrilled with the Citrix receiver for a lot of the applications, but they just don't have much of a choice right now, and we don't really see doing anything differently.
And again, we leverage Config Manager and Intune together, which is the unified device management solution for the bring your own device scenario. And it allows us to manage all iOS, Windows Phone, Windows Surface devices, and that's what we're using currently today. And again, it gives you the rich features to govern these devices, not manage these devices, but you can push policies to these devices. You can offer apps, you have the company portal, and so that's the whole bring your device scenario model for us at Microsoft.
How many different groups are you? How many different IT groups are using Config Manager within your company to do management or to do deployment? And have you opened it up more because of the increased or the better security roles in 2012? We've got a lot of teams like the server engineering team, the client engineering team, the security engineering team saying, you know, we like to get in there, we'd like to do our own deployment or at least have read access. And we're concerned about the interaction between the different deployments. We've got limited bandwidth at different locations. We're just concerned about the havoc that can happen.
Yeah, with role-based administration, that is possible today. We don't leverage it much in production because our admins run the entire infrastructure on behalf of Microsoft. But in our dogfood environment, we definitely leverage role-based administration because, to your point, some of these scenarios where folks want to manage their own app deployments and things of that nature, and security wants to manage policies, we'll allow that, and role-based administration works perfectly for that. But maybe these guys have more.
Yeah, so for us, you know, we have kind of 3 different categories of systems. We have what we call corporate workstations, things we all use. We have our servers, and then we have what we call manufacturing workstations, those systems that run our manufacturing lines. So those are kind of our big 3 buckets, and then we divide through there. But for example, we've enabled our SQL team to deploy and manage patches to the SQL servers because our security team only wants to patch security patches on the server on SQL. So we've definitely we've opened up some more options. Our Citrix team as well. We're using the Citrix connector with Configuration Manager, and we've just now implemented that. But you know, they need to be able to manage deploying those apps and things like that at the Citrix team. There's a couple on our desktop side. You know, we had a kind of an OSD team as well as an app deployment team. So we have several different people using the console, and we've even gone as far as to give just about everybody read rights to the console because in our environment we have a lot of consultants that use Configuration Manager in other environments, and just allowing them to see our environment and you know, give us feedback as well has been pretty beneficial.
Because I mean, any of y'all that are from a university know how decentralized IT typically is there, but we have that, plus we have our hospital, which functions like a corporation. So we have a central IT, and then we have some, you know, outliers. But with SCEP being, you know, in the console, that's kind of been the big thing as far as RBAC is the departments and colleges that have their own ITC administrators. We want them, and they usually want to be able to have things, just their machines, whether it be reporting or remediation, that sort of thing. But as far as, and then the Mac users or Mac administrators mainly just access to reporting. But we don't really have other teams packaging and pushing like Windows updates. The central security team typically does that. But RBAC is, I mean, it's great it's real easy to configure in those limited terms. I mean, you guys may have a lot more complexity to it, but I find it's.
Let me add another thing there real quick. I also wanted to mention, since we've enabled a lot of different groups to use Configuration Manager, you have a lot of managers of those groups that haven't quite realized the power of Configuration Manager, right? You can make things go wrong really quick. I mean, it's a powerful tool.
The Bank of America case. I mean, Bank of Australia case, right?
Yes, yes. So it's interesting. We basically give the manager, he's the owner of the AD group for the Citrix team, for example. But in our rights grid, we kind of give that worst case scenario, you know, as someone that can create packages and deploy packages to Citrix, he could level every single Citrix server you own. You know, you've got to make sure that manager really understands that, because we're kind of reaching to different people that, you know, unfortunately a lot of us have learned the hard way. Not as hard as Bank of America, or I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that, Bank of Australia. I'm getting myself in trouble. But it's really important to make sure they understand, you know, what responsibility they're being given, because that's huge.
So the way we tend to operate within AZ is we've got our central team, which I'm responsible for, but in some of our markets out throughout the world, there are IS organizations that basically interact with the local market. They do all of the builds, they do all the deploy, so we provide them with all of the capabilities that my central administration team has. But in SMS, there's no way to do role-based access, so they could, it hasn't happened. Actually, our central team's made a couple of mistakes, but we haven't had sort of a package from Japan ending up on every client in the organization. We've just gotten really lucky in that. So one of the things that we're looking at taking advantage of within config is the role-based access. So I can say, I reserve the right to come over the top and apply our corporate settings, but I'm going to allow you to do everything that you need to do with and mitigate the risk of that individual being able to push packages or basically decimate the rest of my infrastructure. So.
One more question. Who owns server patching in your organizations? Also, can you comment about your compliance? And if it's a good compliance, how do you achieve that?
So in our organization, we have a hosting tower. So I lead up our end user computing. We have a hosting tower. Our hosting guys are responsible for all of our server patching, and they're using a combination of different products. We're trying to, as part of our config manager deployment, is try to get our hosting guys, because right now we're just targeting it specifically at our endpoints, trying to get the hosting guys to jump on config manager, use it for all of our server estate as well. So.
In our case, our server team, Windows Server team, is responsible for patching, and that's all based on the customer requirements. You know, as far as the time frame of when they can do them, they definitely don't do them every month because it's just there's so many of them, and there's so wide variation in when you can do them for this particular group. So a lot of them are set to just download, notify. But compliance-wise, we are just starting to move from WSUS to using SUB, which is the biggest issue we are having there is the forced reboot. The on no option. You can make it sit and count down for 24 hours, but obviously you don't want to do that. But you can't. They're used to hit and cancel, which if it's up to me, I love the forced reboot. But you've got a machine that's hooked up to a patient, we can't have that happen, where they can't cancel it. So that's been the biggest barrier. To reboot a patient. Yeah.
So we have a separate, we call them server patching team, but any software dist or anything else, that team also handles. Just majority what they do is patching. But for our server team, they have the ability to deploy, but they don't actually create anything in the console. So I have kind of a broader patching team that downloads all the patches and looks at all the ones that have been authorized. And I won't get into our detail about our patching process unless you really want to, but basically our patching people make them available, and then the server patching team then creates the deployments using some scripts and things like that for CMDB to populate collections and target them appropriately that way.
And our team, we own the server patching and client patching for Microsoft, and we have not missed compliance since we've deployed Config Manager 2012 or even in 2007. And we also use the automatic deployment rule for software patching, and so it's saved our administrators a bunch of time, right, going from hours to minutes with ADR. And yeah, again, it's all Config Manager based for our patching.
Hi. How do you handle third-party security updates? Do you have any recommendations, and what kind of tools do you use? Do you use SCOP or things like that?
We leverage software distribution for third-party security updates, and that's pretty much our approach.
For us, it depends. We do use System Center Updates Publisher, SCUP, to some extent. I will say with the new application model, you can kind of do pretty much all of that just deploying an app the proper way, right? They're very similar. You've got detection rules, you've got applicability rules, and you can get compliance off of that as well. For us, though, especially like Adobe Acrobat or something like that, we really want to deploy those using the same software updates process. If it's going to interact with the user, it might require a reboot or something like that. So they get it during that same patch window, and even more so in the server team, we do our best to try to deploy those using the same method to kind of keep that simple.
Pretty much the same thing, especially with the, we're looking at going to the Adobe auto updates because, deploying 6 Adobe updates a month is a little old, but currently we do it with traditional, just like it's an application. And somebody should have mentioned earlier about a big plus with ConfigMan 2012 is the application model. And we've started doing a lot of it with detection. So we want to go find machines that, and I mean, you could have done it with desired configuration management, but it's just so much easier. You just create a fake application and set the detection rule to be something that says that app's on the machine or that version. So we automatically populate collections for the various versions of Adobe, whether it be Flash or Reader or something like that, and then we can target to that. But you can do these simulated deployments to see exactly which machines are going to get it, or in our case, we do it to just see which machines have something that we're looking for. It might be there's 500 machines out there out of 18,000 that have some manually installed app, and we want to do an automated uninstall, so we got to go find those. Or, I mean, technically we could just deploy it to all and hope for the best, but we use a detection to go find which ones and build the collection on that. We're looking at a third party it's a vendor that's actually here that has a plugin for ConfigMan for third-party updates. We're starting to evaluate that. I don't know if I can say.
Because we're a heavily validated environment, we have to do a lot of testing and scheduling, so what we tend to do is well, for anything critical, we just push it out, no questions asked, and that's an agreement that we have with our user base. But things that aren't critical, we hold them and we push out updates to basically what we call our foundation layer. It's the Adobes, it's the Flashes, it's the JREs of the world. We do those quarterly. So we have to have a round of app testing, or at least have our application teams do an assessment, determine what the impact may be on their app. We have to get to a certain level of agreement with our app teams to make sure that we can push stuff out, and then we go through a typical format. We let our customers. We've written some scripts into basically you can reschedule 3 times, and then we just force install it. So we're not quite there in terms of doing auto updates because of our validation situation.
I have a question about your staffing levels. How do you validate them to your upper management, and how do you see MDM affecting your staffing levels?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure, your staffing levels. How do you guys validate your staffing levels to your management? So with all the feature sets we're talking about, like SCUP, that's taking some of the packaging out. And then the second question is, how do you see MDM affecting those levels? Are you bringing on staff to deal with MDM specifically, or are you just doing what you have?
So you're talking about staffing levels and how the staff levels are impacted by some of the newer technologies?
Exactly.
Well, so we're a heavily outsourced organization. So I go to my supplier and I say, all right, we're going to run out SCCM. I mean, on my team, I've got a couple of service managers and a couple of lead architects, and that's based on a certain level of volume. I go to my supplier and I say, here's what we're going to do. You need to come back to me and tell me what it's going to cost to do it. And they basically, all of the doers are on the supply side.
We're not going to increase our staff to support MDM specifically. We are sort of reprovisioning some different people to help with the rollout of it because it's so hands-on. Kind of like doing, like registration fairs, so just temporary stuff. But day to day, it's you set the policies. We pretty much have a standard policy for iOS and a standard policy for Android. It's not like we have 30 different policies for different roles and stuff. So we don't anticipate increasing staff just because of MDM or any type of patch management.
For us at Microsoft, no impact on the staff, right? You don't need additional staff to run unified device management. You implement the Intune connector. It's a single pane of glass. There's not really much to it. It's pretty simple to do it. And so, if anything, if you guys are looking to reduce, it may help in that perspective. We're not, but yeah, we definitely don't have to increase staff.
So I have a question. Some of our users, they don't know all about the mobile devices and how to work with them. They don't know how to set them up either. They don't know how to configure the Exchange account. So we found a third-party tool that could, in the enrollment process, it also configures the Exchange account. We were looking into Windows Intune, but we were not able to do this with Windows Intune. How do you manage this? What are your thoughts about that?
how do we manage the exchange settings and stuff?
Yeah, exactly.
We do that with mobile device management. I mean, when they install that agent, or they just go to the App Store and install it, and then it asks them for their email address and password, and it brings all those policies. So we bring down Exchange, VPN, and our secure Wi-Fi, and then it also brings down some policies like forcing the passcode on iOS. Android, it doesn't force it; it just tells them one time. Unfortunately, it doesn't, you know, as iOS, they have to do it. But that's how we do that. I mean, which a lot of people are going to like. We did before MDM, we were doing one of the Apple profile, where we just put it on a website and they could just go to it with their new mobile device. So with MDM, we're having to have them take that, delete that, and then enroll in the MDM, and it puts everything back. Because any of those settings like that, because you want to be able to wipe those if the device is lost, but it's called selective wipe. So you don't want to just wipe the whole phone. You know, everybody's got pictures, might have 10 years worth of pictures on there. So we don't want to be those people that wiped out all your family vacation. So, but in order to get rid of those when you report it lost, the MDM product had to put it on there. So everybody's got Exchange settings. We have to get them to delete it, and then when they install MDM and enroll, it brings them right back. But now we can pull them off.
We have an Exchange team that actually pushes out policies for the Exchange piece, the EAS piece. But with mobile device management and EAS, different policies, the most restrictive policy will win. So if EAS, let's just say they are implementing, our Exchange team is implementing a 4-pin password, and Unified Device Management, or MDM, we're implementing a 5-pin password, you're going to get the 5-pin password prompt. So the most restrictive policy will always win. But we're really aligned with our EAS team, our Exchange team, so the policies are not mismatched. We'll align those policies accordingly.
Are any of you guys using an approval type process for requesting software, like license type software? And if so, are you using native Microsoft products to manage that whole approval process?
We are actually not in that scenario where we have to ask folks to approve, to approve apps. I mean, we own the apps, and so it's not a scenario for us at Microsoft. However, we were talking to some customers and offering them or giving them advice to use Service Manager to help with the approval process, and integrating that with Config Manager in order to push out those approvals. Because if you just leverage Config Manager, it's all through the console, right? And you don't want to see the whole app list. So you use Service Manager in order to send the email or request to the actual approver that the app needs to be approved. So if you're looking to approve app X, that email will go to that actual person that's the approver of that app for the user to download it. So that's one of the solutions that you could probably leverage.
We currently leverage a third-party integration with Configuration Manager, like a shopping type of portal. Like I said, majority of our software is just available, but we do have a handful of things that require approval, and they'll go through the shopping app for that.
We don't do any type of approvals primarily because of we don't use Service Manager. I mean, we have submitted a DCR with the product team to add that sort of workflow into a future version of Config Man with the email type alerting, where you say, okay, this requires approval, and here's the two people who one or both of them have to approve it, and that way they get an email. But like Brian said, you can, if you've got Service Manager, you can use, I think you use Orchestrator to cause that. There's a great blog post on how to do it, but we're not on Service Manager, so we don't publish things that would need that kind of approval, even though we'd like to, once we get to that point of being able to generate an email without having a third-party product.
So we have a two-step process. One is just if somebody is requesting a new application to be packaged and made available, that will actually go through a BMC remedy on demand product. So that's our service management module. So that request will go through. They can track that request through the packaging process. Once it gets through the packaging process, then we then mount it into SMS. We have a third-party product that sits on top of SMS and it's our app catalog. And so it's our app store. You can go in, you can see everything that's available, select it. If it has an approval on it or it has a licensing component component on it will go off to the designated approver for that application. Once they approve it, it will then be automatically distributed to the client. We're managing 4,000 requests a month. I'm not sure how we don't have every possible piece of software in the world packaged and available for our users to install. It's unbelievable.
All right, we've got about time for one more question.
So how do you manage the licenses that you buy, either from Microsoft or third-party products, versus what's actually being used out there? I mean, this is aside from the approval process where you're really putting a person in charge. What's the system that you use? Is it spreadsheets? Is it easy? Is it cumbersome? Because we're struggling with it.
So because we're still on SMS, it's a very time-intensive process. So we do a lot of inventorying through SMS. We've actually engaged a professional organization that all they do is license entitlement and audit reporting. So we take a lot of the content out of SMS, we hand it over to them, they do all the rationalization between looking at what's in our license catalog versus what's in our install base, and we try to then do the rationalization based on that. What we're looking at doing when we move into config managers is introducing a third-party product that will extend the capability within config manager and really help us narrow our ability and really reduce the amount of time and effort that has to go into that exercise. So
we're about 95% app V, which is user base, so nothing's actually installed. The icon follows the user around, but many of the things that we have licenses they're more concurrency rather than install. And in AppV, you can actually set the number of concurrent sessions. So it works just as advertised. But it seems like we don't have a lot that we have an eCal with Microsoft for most of those products and stuff. So, but with AppV, doing that concurrency works great.
So I mentioned we use a third-party shopping portal, and then there's another feature or another product from that same company that does the app rationalization, right? So that's a huge thing, and it's a big undertaking for anybody to do, I think, without third-party right now. When you're really trying to do license counts, understand usage, and maybe take it as far as even trying to reclaim unused software, there's a lot there.
All right, I think I'm live. All right, give these guys a big round of applause. I know that when I first asked them to come up here and stand in front of you and ask questions, they had a little bit of how much preparation do I need to do? But they're doing things on a daily basis, and I hope that you got a lot of great information from them that you can take back. Thanks.